Hello, everyone. My name is Father Ted Trinko. I'm a contemplative priest of the Incarnate Word serving in Maryland of the United States. Today is Monday, October 21st of the 29th week in Ordinary Time, and our Gospel comes from Luke's 12th chapter, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." He replied to him, "Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator?" Then he said to the crowd, "Take care to guard against all greed, for though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions." Then he told them a parable. There was a rich man whose land produced a bountiful harvest. He asked himself, "What shall I do? For I do not have space to store my harvest." And he said, "This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. There I shall store all my grain and other goods. And I shall say to myself, now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this night your life will be demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, to whom will they belong? Thus will it be for the one who stores up treasure for himself, but is not rich in what matters to God." The beginning of today's gospel passage might sound familiar to some parents who usually have to play mediator between the children. "Tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." It was a common practice for people in Palestine to take their unsettled disputes to respected rabbis or teachers. Jesus, however, was not interested in getting mixed up in their financial argument, but he took advantage of the opportunity to teach them what his followers' attitude to material things should be. It is a message particularly pertinent to those who have what is sufficient for them, which is most people in many parts of the world in our day and age. Tomorrow our Lord will talk to those who lack in abundance of material possessions. Before telling the parable of the rich fool, Jesus laid out the teaching in simple terms. He said, "Guard against all greed. One's life does not consist of possessions." Riches are not evil in themselves. A rich man is not a sinner simply because he is rich. They can even be enjoyed with Christian moderation when God gives them to us. But they also need to be shared with one's neighbor. By practicing charity with the gifts received from God, those who have possessions in this earth begin to store up treasures in heaven. To be greedy with one's goods is to act unjustly. God has given us certain things not to accumulate them for our own use, rather, they ought to be distributed amongst the more needy. Greed also puts at risk our trust in divine providence. When we think that we are able to provide for all of our needs, we stop relying on God. And this leads to great anxiety. It's not a coincidence that this culture of ours, which is so materially affluent, has been labeled by certain psychologists as the age of anxiety. Also, greed hinders one's union with God. We need to be detached from earthly things if we desire to attach ourselves to heavenly things. To detach ourselves from the things of this earth is to achieve the freedom of those who are poor in spirit. So a detached person is willing to give some of what he has to those who do not have as much. So the solution to greed, the way to get rid of it, is to live out the first beatitude of the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And to put one's heart on heavenly goods. Wealth is to be seen not as an end or the objective or the goal of one's life, but rather as a means given by the Lord to do good. Christ serves as an example since he, being rich, became poor for our sake when he came to earth. He chose a life of poverty when he could have become a man in a palace of Caesar on the banks of the Tiber. All throughout his life, he did not have a place to lay his head. He chose material poverty. Once a rich young man asked Christ, "What do I need to do in order to be perfect?" We just heard that on Sunday's Gospel. Jesus answered that he should follow the commandments. I've done all that since my childhood, responded the man. Now, our Lord, in this particular encounter with the rich young man, he was pleased, and our Lord then proposed a higher way. He said, if you want to be perfect, go, sell all your possessions, and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me. But the rich young man heard this, and he went away sad, because he had many possessions. Now, it's not wrong that he had many possessions. It's not breaking a commandment, but it is not the best way. And that's why Jesus went on to say on that occasion, it will be hard for one who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. We can be spiritually poor if we have lots of things, but it is more difficult. And it is also necessary at times to share some of those riches with other people. Otherwise, we're going to end up like the rich man in the story of Lazarus. He was condemned not because he was a bad person, or rather, not because he abused Lazarus, but because he neglected Lazarus. So those who have things but don't use those things to support others are in the same boat as that rich man who was condemned for neglecting Lazarus. Coming back to today's gospel, the man in today's gospel, or rather, the man in today's parable is called a fool. The rich man is called a fool. Not because he was rich, but because of what he did with his riches. He had this abundant harvest. He didn't even have a place to put all the crops, but he didn't consider giving it to others. He was so closed in his own world that the needs of others never even crossed his own mind. One biblical commentator says there is no other parable which has so many pronouns referring to oneself. I, me, my, mine are said over and over again. The rich fool was aggressively self-centered. The Romans had a proverb which said that money was like seawater. The more a man drank, the thirstier he became. And so long as a man's attitude is that of the rich fool, his desire will always be to get more, which is the reverse of the Christian way first walked by Jesus himself. Another reason for which the gospel calls the rich man a fool is because he never saw beyond this world. He was so fixated on this world and business and investments that he forgot that one day, when he least expected it, he was going to die. The people who forget there is another world are destined to a rather grim surprise one day. So he was planning all for this world, but he never made any investments for the next. It's like you plan night and day for your flight to Europe, but you don't actually plan what you're going to do when you actually show up in Europe. You invest all your money in getting the best, first class ticket, and you spend all your money with refreshments and entertainment on the way to Europe. But then when you show up in Europe, you have no more money, and so you end up sleeping on the street because you have no place to stay. So we can ask today for Our Lady, the model of those who are poor in spirit, to obtain for us the grace to always imitate her Son in at least having a spirit of poverty, and if God deign to grant us the grace of a vocation to religious life, that we might also follow him in actual poverty, truly denying ourselves the possession and the ownership of the things of this world.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed hearing the gospel and homily, I invite you to share it with someone you know who may also find it rewarding, and also to subscribe to the Catholic Voice channel. Please see in the description below if you would like to receive a text message for each daily gospel and homily. Please also keep our missionary priests throughout the world in your prayers. Thank you, and God bless.